one of the things I kind of want to start with is, as things are shifting so rapidly in our society overall, as we're preparing for the new landscape ahead, could you talk a little bit about how Stonehill has adjusted to work with current juniors, and maybe just what you see sort of as a shift coming up?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. And just want to thank you and everybody for taking the time to join this morning. I know many of us are spending a lot of our days on platforms like this and finding ways to connect. And it's so reassuring to have these moments, right? To find these creative ways to continue to have some really important conversations, especially at this moment. And for those of us who have children who are navigating their educations in different ways at different times, I'm grateful for the opportunity and for the audience. You know, and Jack and I have talked about this a lot. I mean, this is kind of an unprecedented moment, and that's a theme that keeps coming up in every corner of our lives. But it's coming for you all as families at what might be your first time going through the college process. And you know, challenging moment for this. But I tend to be a worrier. I tend to worry quite a bit, and especially about this process for families, especially about navigating the college selection, the college search, the college application process. And I worry in that realm, mostly from the amount of anxiety I think that comes from the unknown of what happens. How do I find a good fit? How do I apply? What matters in that process? You know, how do I differentiate myself? And I think that my goal in this, under any circumstances and in any situation, is to, you know, Jack, is to try to alleviate that anxiety, try to remove some of the mystery. And so, despite this disruption at this moment for you and for your sons. You know, what are colleges, what are Stonehill in particular, and what are colleges, I think, really trying to do to maintain relevance, but not overstep at what's a challenging moment, to remain visible and available, but not to raise any more of that anxiety and you know, feel as though that in any way that's unprecedented or unexpected disruption is going to put anybody at a disadvantage, because I don't think any of us feel that way. And certainly in the conversations we're having with our national organization, that theme has been the focus. Let's be sure we're maintaining our availability. I know those are themes that we'll come across a little bit, but Stonehill in particular, with juniors, a lot of things we've been trying to maintain some stability. So those typical, you know, messages, those campaigns, whether they be print messages or email messages, you know, we're trying to get out to students and have been able to do with relative consistency from some of the partners that we have off campus. I'd say at a time of year when we might be ramping that up a little bit more and really talking a lot more about traditional visit, getting to campus, which, you know, for us is a highlight given the resources that we have there and how much we want you to see and connect mostly with our students. You know, I'll be honest, that's an area we probably dialed back or slowed down a little bit on our communication stream. One, to not raise that anxiety for you to feel like you might be missing out on something, or there's something you should be doing right now, because there isn't necessarily. But also not to bombard, right? Families are dealing with so many different things at the moment, and trying to balance so many different priorities and different transitions across the household. And we see that too in our homes. But, you know, despite that dialing back, I think that, you know, if you were to go and visit our website or the visit website of any of the schools that you might be considering, you'll notice a real change in tone and a change in availability. And our efforts have been really designed to welcome families, you know, to address through video content that we've curated, kind of a reflection on the moment, and an availability and a little bit of guidance on what we can do right now and what maybe it's okay if we don't do right now. And then we take a little bit more time to be deliberate about having those conversations with families. You know, the visit to campus, the exploration, which I know we've got some specific questions about, is really important. But just because we can't do that during April break doesn't mean we won't be able to. It doesn't mean there aren't moments and months and weeks ahead where we don't have every reason to believe that will still come about. Now, that's not to say we haven't, you know, all of us kind of across the industry really worked really hard to increase the availability, to increase the exploring our campus features of our sites and make those available. But that's, you know, really designed to be more of a forward-looking thing, right? Here's what you'll get to see. Here are the students you'll get to talk to. And I think some of those, you know, moments like this, Zoom conferences and information sessions, you know, we've slowed down, you know, kind of on hammering families with those opportunities. But in all honesty, I know that next week, right, the week that would be before the typical April break, you'll probably start to see that a little bit more if you're on our list. You know, trying to maintain some consistency there, where, you know, maybe if you can't be with us, can we come to your homes? You know, can we be with you and still have those conversations and talk a little bit about the individual questions you might have? So those opportunities are there. Virtual visits are a little different than campus visits. We don't have to worry about you're planning your ride to campus or setting a portion of that Saturday aside. We're trying to keep some of those windows to visibility a little shorter, so we don't have to bombard folks with so many messages.
I think that message of respect is so great, because it is, we understand everyone wants to still go through the process, but there's so many other things going on. It's one thing at a time, and everyone is going to have their own pace right now, and whatever that pace is completely appropriate.
Right.
And I mean, you mentioned it, the normal talk track in our office right ahead of April break is get out there, go visit a campus, like let's really start thinking, exploring in that process. And now that we can't do that, if we flip it around, instead of what you've done from Stonehill's side, if you had a current junior in your house right now who is trying to explore colleges and start thinking about what they wanted to do, how would you advise them to take those steps, considering some of the obstacles that they have in front of us right now?
Right. I think it does kind of create an opportunity, right? The flip side, if we can't do one thing, doesn't mean we can't focus on some others. And I'm sure, as successful juniors, your students are probably hearing from a lot of schools, in schools that you might have very different levels of familiarity with. And that's really, I think, designed to be an invitation to invite students to consider exploring on their own terms and in their own ways. And every student, whether they're a sophomore, junior, or senior, is in a different place with where their college decision or their college ranking or their maybe academic program of interest or how far away they might want to go from home. Everyone's in a different decision-making process. Everyone's evolving through that a little differently. And I feel like you all are fortunate to have the resources and events like this and resources available in your counseling office to still avail yourself of. And I would encourage you to keep doing that. I know that you're getting those questions and conversations from families, but I think that continue to keep it like in that right place with your family, having a conversation about it. We're all spending a little bit more time together in our houses, and maybe that's not a bad thing. That set aside some time to talk about college search process a little bit more deliberately. I think the best resources that are out there, are really going to still be the school websites. A lot of us have invested really significantly in kind of getting away from some of the traditional print stuff, the view book and some of those mailings, which we do a little bit of, but the website content, the way some of the video content and academic program content has really evolved, offers students and families much more detailed insight into not only what the programs are, but who the people are behind them. And so looking for those answers and those curiosities. When we're doing more traditional, kind of getting ready for the application process, junior panels, I always come back to the mantra of do the research, right? The College Board has some great resources out there through bigfeature.com. There's a site called College Navigator out there through the federal government, which offers great analytical data. Peruse it, kind of start to build that list a little bit and think about what are some of the strengths of the different schools? What are some of their expectations, their academic profiles, their application process? What guidance do they offer? Building it, when we get to the end, I always recommend starting a spreadsheet and just kind of having a list of schools, what their deadlines are, what their requirements are, what their program strengths are. So you have a baseline and you can keep track, because there's just so much information and different criteria, different expectations school to school, that if you build your own little database, and it doesn't sound like a fun thing to do, but it can be, right? It can be something that kind of brings us together as a family, and you track and weigh and reflect on what the different sites are telling you, and where maybe over the summer you do want to prioritize some of those visits, and how more informed those questions you might ask when you arrive on their campus might be, because you've been able to dig a little bit deeper now into not only the admission and apply sites that they may offer, but the program sites that they offer for the individual majors, the different academic support resources, how it is they go about advising, how their students are being successful, how they graduate, and where they ultimately go on. I think that we all have an expectation on the part of our accreditors and the people we report to make sure that's transparent. And I think you'll see that especially now in our site. But it should beg questions, right? It should encourage you also to reach out and connect with the schools on your own. We might not be on campus, but we're all on our virtual campus in our homes, and especially now, really excited to connect with juniors and their families who might want to have a little bit more of an offline or online conversation, as the case might be.
Absolutely, yeah. It's it's amazing how kind of the mission of a school extends well beyond whatever our campus walls have, and the way that people are responding to this and finding ways to reach out. And I think we're all so proud of the work that we're doing right now. The idea of pulling more people into that and having them experience it with us, to become a part of that community. I think that's happening at CM, and I think that's happening at Stonehill too. And I'm really happy that you brought up virtual tours, because that's obviously, the number one thing that a lot of people are looking at right now as they're trying to experience what a campus might look like. We switched to SCORE. They have virtual tours right on that landing page. You brought up College Navigator and some of those other sites. When you're on your end, as you're constructing a virtual tour, how do you build it? What do you hope the student sees when he builds that? And if you were a student looking at it as someone who's kind of a pro, having gone through the process, what are some of the markers that you would say, okay, well, this is a good thing to look at, or this might be window dressing or something that's less relevant?
It's a great question. So there's really, and SCORE is a great resource, and we're actually working with them a little bit too, and looking to expand some of that visibility right now in particular. I think you'll probably find, as you look at some of those virtual tour resources out there, it's sort of like two different philosophies on it. There's the more traditional, and there's a corporate part that does it. I think it's called UVisit, and they partner with a lot of schools. They offer a really comprehensive approach to showing every corner of campus, right? It kind of operates on like a Google Maps sort of logic, where you can click and follow a line and hear from a student or a faculty member in the various spaces of campus that are relevant. And I think that the idea is you try to recreate as best as you can what it would be like to walk around that campus and hear from the student who's leading the tour guide. And I think that program, that product does a really exceptional job of trying to create that distance experience, put you there with a 360-degree view, and experience it on your own time. And you can also navigate, the way that you want, and see the different buildings, and kind of explore from a mapping standpoint. Where do I live? Where do I eat? Where do I go to class? Where do I research in the labs? And I think those are great products. I think that the other way to think about it is and a strategy some other folks have taken, is to build a virtual visit landing page that's a little bit more video based, and invites families to explore and hear from campus partners, right? Deans, faculty, students, kind of get a glimpse of what it's like outside of the tour, right? If you were there throughout the course of a year, or kind of seeing some of the highlight events, actually, what does it look like at commencement when folks walk down onto the stage, or what does it look like during move-in? And I think there's just a different approach. I think the things to look for are, the authenticity behind it. How much does this make me feel like I could learn here, I could live here, I could be with these people. And so that those questions, as you're looking at those experiences, I think are the ones you want to feel. How well does this answer that question for me? Nothing can substitute really being there as a student, and experiencing what it's like on a given day. But I think it's also important to think about the whole site, the whole web identity of an institution as a tour, as a way of exploring who are the people here that I will learn with, and who are the people here that will inspire me to be successful. And so to think maybe outside of the context of just the quote virtual tour video or app or feature, which are good resources. I don't want to diminish that at all. But to think holistically, that shouldn't just answer those questions that we want a family to ask when they're on campus. Is this where I can find a sense of belonging? And use it more as, again, a way of informing some of the other questions you might see. And I'll say this, and I would say whether the virtual tour or a future visit in person was going to be in the cards or not, we consider our best resource, and I know at Stonehill we're not alone in this, to be our current students, and we're very fortunate to have a pretty robust community of Knights, of CM grads who are on our campus, the Skyhawks now, and I would consider them really our best resources. And we know these communities are great ways to connect. Reach out to our students, reach out to our guide, and then your graduates who've gone other places, and get the personal tour, right? Get the commentary from the student of, am I happy? What are the things maybe I'd change about my campus? how well have maybe they handled this transition that they might not have expected to come up. How well are they supporting their students in moments that are unanticipated? And I think those are just good compliments to that virtual tour, and really meant to be, again, an invitation to explore beyond some of those traditional tools. And again, like we've invested quite a bit in creating video and other the virtual ways to see our campus, and continue. Every school is always moving in that direction, just because of the way the search has evolved. But I don't want to downplay some of those more traditional resources of the people around you that you really trust quite a bit.
And those people are permanent, right? I mean, there's
That's right.
Whatever we might be shifting in terms of the way that the process is going this year, our students and the way that they can tell the message of what we're doing is something that's not going to change. And I think it would have been a great resource last year. It'll be a great resource 5 years in the future. And it's definitely a great resource this year as we go through. Right. Pivoting a little bit from the personal to some of the numbers that come into the process, there's, I would say, a good deal of anxiety about testing this year. The March SAT test was canceled. The May test was canceled. Right now, we're hoping that June is going to be able to happen. And we're seeing a lot of schools that are making a shift to test optional, and parents are trying to navigate that water a little bit. Stonehill's been a test optional school for a while now. Could you talk a little bit, basically, how you view testing as a test optional school, especially now that more schools are going to be entering that pool with you? What role does testing play? How might you advise someone about testing over the course of the next 6 months with so many schools going to test optional?
It's been really exciting, and I want to give, certainly on our side as institutions, as colleges and universities, College Board has been really good and really transparent with us, and they're partners who work both with the secondary community and also with the higher ed community, and we've got great resources and support folks there, and they've been very transparent, but also moving with the situation as it evolves. I think in the perspective of families and students who are considering testing, if you've had an opportunity to sit for an exam earlier on, or if that opportunity presents itself a little bit later on to do so, you certainly continue to take advantage of that opportunity. But the other side of that is also that, just like you said, there's going to be a lot of other schools that were historically test required that are going to move into the optional realm, and that's all over the news. And there's probably an opportunity in it for students and for families and for schools too to think creatively about how it is they evaluate a candidate. I think that having been at an institution that was both test required and test optional and gone through a transition, I've been really fortunate that I've seen a lot of different migrations. About half of our pool in a given year are what we would consider test optional students, so students who submit no test scores. Our optional policy, and optional means something different everywhere, but I think especially now, as you're looking at those apply sites and as you're looking at what the requirements are going to change for a future year, knowing if that school might require something else, written or graded piece of work, an additional essay. We don't do that at Stonehill. We're relatively liberally test optional. And the reason behind that choice for us is really the issue at the core of being an optional school in the first place, which was, we know the best predictor, the absolute best predictor of a student's ability to be successful in their first year and beyond is the grades they had in high school and the level of curriculum that they chose, the rigor of the college prep plus college aligned curriculum in high school and how well they achieved in that. And so that student's grade, that student's progress over their transcript over 4 years, how well they did in making choices about the 5 core academic areas in their junior and senior year, taking maybe some honors or AP level courses, and then being successful in that. That rigor, that pacing is the most critical element of being a first year successful student. And so our focus, whether it's for a student who submits scores or not, is always on that high school progress, is always on that transcript, because we know that gives us the greatest confidence. Now, again, that's not to say that there isn't value in the exam. And when we look at different parts of whether it's the ACT or SAT, there's correlations there. And I would support a College Board's research in that particular area. But I think especially now, directing for students who aren't able to take or aren't able to produce as much or any potential exams at all. The direction of the focus is going to go on the objective elements of the process. Of course, we'll always have that sense of the person, the writing, the essay, the activities, the involvement. But, you know, in our obligation to our colleges and universities is bringing students who are going to be successful. The additional level of focus is on which classes did they take, how well did they progress over 4 years, did they finish strong in their senior year. I think interpreting the junior year a little differently is going to be something we'll all do, right? Not everyone's going to have, you know, the traditional grading in junior year. We're giving students on our campuses much more flexibility for a pass-fail model, and that's going to be okay. You know, but you look at and again, we're fortunate here at Catholic Memorial, your students are nearly all going on to four-year institutions, and so that the strength of the high school, the level of curriculum, the expectation of the classroom will drive more of the attention of the ultimate decision, absent you know, some national exams that students also take. But I think that while there's more of that this year, the philosophy behind it and the strategy of making choices is very, very well established across higher ed, and we have really great resources for how it is we go about. And I will say, whether a school's historically been test required or not, you know, our research is pretty consistent and shows us the areas that we can be confident in from a student's progression through their curriculum over 4 years.
That's a great answer, and I appreciate the thorough nature with which, you know, you covered that from the way that you would evaluate that as a school. And in thinking about, as a high school counselor, and the way that our guys are finishing up this year as they're moving to an online environment and how they're preparing for the fall of their senior year, that heightened sort of weight, let's say, on what happens in a high school classroom as a way of demonstrating who you could be as a college student. I'm happy with that, you know, rather than the stress and anxiety that sometimes a single test puts on a student to hit X. I'm excited about the overall shift, and something I've been talking to parents about, and you hit on it a little bit there in terms of course rigor and the school program. I'm talking to parents about how, with the shift that we've done at CM and how we're very proud of what we've done and the way that our students have responded so far, we're going to be discussing that in our school profile, which I think is a little bit of inside baseball for, you know, college admissions counselors and high school counselors. Could you talk both how you read a school profile for a school that you would know like CM, and also, let's say CM was on the other side of the country and you hadn't had an applicant there from there in 3 years. How do you read, and how does that school profile factor into your decision?
I'm really great feedback, because right, it is something that not everyone sees, right? That profile, and I will say from the function of sitting at my desk and reviewing a candidate, and you know, I'll start with the Catholic Memorial example. Now, I always look at the profile first, right? That school report form, which is your recommendation and your assessment of that student relative to the school community. It tells us which courses are offered, what are the curricular expectations, what's the grading scale, and how does this student fit into our academic culture? You know, what are the expectations, and what were maybe any changes in terms of the curriculum that have happened over the course of the year, or the 4 years, or next year, in terms of weighting, availability of sections. Everything we do before we even get to the transcript, even if it's a school I've been reading for years and years, we always look to the profile first. Nothing we will see on the transcript has any really meaning or context until we obtain that from the profile and from the school report. And so it's reassuring to know, and I've had, you know, questions from other colleagues who work in schools, you know, who've said, hey, this is what we're going to put on our profile this year. Does this answer what questions you might have? You know, and I know we've talked about that a little bit, and it's reassuring to know you're so far ahead of the game in that way. But that school profile is always the lens through which we would interpret a student's transcript. It tells us what's available, because I think, you know, certainly our case as a private Catholic school, you know, here in Massachusetts, and a lot of private schools or public schools, we're doing interpretation, right? We're always doing translating, and that profile is our decoding key. You know, the student's candidacy is always within the context of the high school environment that they're coming from, and all those features, the curriculum, the culture, the service expectation, the experiential learning. That context is essential, because our ability to evaluate is really set by the transparency and candor of that profile.
Thank you. And so, you know, for the parents in the room, we our school profile that is a private document that we typically only send to the colleges. But the steps that we're taking right now as a school community, we're going to include that narrative. We also include some of the courses that are available, the service requirements, the things that really make CM are all pretty transparent on that profile. And kind of moving from the macro of the school level down to the personal, one of the great opportunities that we always have at CM, especially with a school like Stonehill, that's a close neighbor that we send a lot of guys to, is that personal, the face-to-face, getting to know the juniors maybe in the spring of this year, which, those face-to-face meetings aren't necessarily possible, but definitely in the fall of their senior year. Because we have some of the hurdles that we have right now for those face-to-face meetings, how can juniors really be making those meaningful relationships where they have a real partner rather than, a process as they step into the application window?
So, and you're right, this time of year, it feels a little different having done this for so long and not being at college fairs, right? Not having a chance to visit your school and lots of schools in the area. And you continue to grow those connections. And a lot of your juniors we probably met in the fall when they came to the fair that morning in the fall. But we know we'll have that opportunity back again in the future. I would say for now, for us and probably for a lot of schools, is using some of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier on, some of those virtual visits, some of those remote information sessions that we know schools like us and lots of other schools are offering through different web platforms as your way of learning more, but also raising your hand and saying, this is a school that I'm at least considering seeing myself fitting in. Those are ways that are always available to connect. The other thing I would say is, if again in a more traditional environment, whether it's Stonehill or any school, almost always the counselor or the admission representative who's visiting the school or who's going to be available, we're assigned. We have a staff of 13, and every one of those 13 staff members has a set of regions, high schools, where they are the primary contact. They are your relationship resource there. And they're going to be likely the one also reading that application when it comes in several months. I won't say a couple of months, several months. We have time. And that person, I will say, I think sometimes we're I don't know how we're viewed always. I don't know always how we're viewed. How we want to be viewed is as a resource. We want you to ask those questions. We want you to reach out to us. Say, hey, I'm considering your school. You're pretty high on my list. I've got questions about this. I haven't had a chance to visit, or I have, and I have these remaining questions, or I attended that virtual information session, or I saw your campus tour. What's it like for this? Or can I talk to maybe a current student? Can you put me in touch with a current student who's there right now? That person, that admission counselor, their role, I think their reason why they like doing the work that they do is because of the family conversations they get to have, both pre-application and post. And I think that finding out, just reaching out to the admission email box or calling the number. Again, we might not be on campus, but we are on all day. And for I think for lots of us, and it's a great opportunity. We're a little bit more available in some ways now. Being in quieter rooms at home sometimes. Reach out to us if there's a school you're considering and you want to talk to the person who's probably going to be the one to read your application. They want to hear from you too. And not just for the benefit of the social connection right now, but to be the counselor, to be the help, to be a resource and to answer those questions. Our seniors are really wrapping up their process in the next couple of weeks in a lot of ways. And, especially now, we're as committed or even more to being available for those questions, or even just the, introduction. Here's who I am. I'm planning on applying next year. Those, find out who your counselor is at the schools that you're considering, and just make that soft outreach. It is the same way you would if you were coming up to a college fair table and saying, just introduce yourself, and that's all it takes. And it goes a long way. We remember, and we keep track, and it gives us something that we can reference back as we get further down the road too.
I think that's fantastic. And sometimes I advise students that people are going to say yes. If you ask them for help, they're going to say yes, and they're going to help you right now. And especially in this climate, this is a way to distinguish yourself as someone who's reaching out, who is being proactive, and is saying, I'm still I care about my process. I want to make sure that I'm still invested and I'm hitting the benchmarks that I need to hit despite everything else. And the last thing I want to talk to you about, Joe, is as we're entering this period, we've been talking to our students really about intentionality and the value of research in this process, because there is so much uncertainty. And a great way of distinguishing yourself is really having a solid grasp on what my fit schools are academically, socially, and then also I think financially is something that everyone's going to be considering this year. And thinking about some of the parents on this call this morning, what advice or research tools would you share with parents about ways to think about or learn about affordability and accessibility as so many people are facing uncertainty over the next 2 years?
No, it's a great question, and Jack, and I like the way you put it, right? So as you're building that list, as you're looking at those schools, and using the great guidance that you're able to receive through the counseling office and you and your colleagues, but also using some of those resources out there that schools make available, to think about what your financial fit might be, right? To borrow your phrase. I think it's always important to keep that in context when you look at academic profiles and selectivity, that there are differences out there in how it is that a school might go about awarding the resources that they have. Now, I will say, I'm speaking more from my experience at Stonehill, but again, in connecting with other colleges out there, we're fortunate that we can adapt. We can adapt as the market adapts, and we can adapt as the economy adapts. And our goal is always to bring in the right group of students to really become our campus leaders and to benefit from the education that we have. And so I think we're prepared. I think we're prepared for questions, and we're also prepared for how things might have changed for families. Thinking about that financial fit, there are resources out there that you can look to from a policy standpoint. Every school, either on their admission side or on their financial assistance side, will have at least some introductory information as to how it is they go about awarding aid, right? Are they an institution that predominantly awards aid based upon financial eligibility, household income, need-based aid? Are they an institution that does that, but likely also does some awarding of merit scholarships, right? They've decided it's also important for them to differentiate themselves in the market by competing for strong students. And you'll find at different levels of selectivity, a lot of your much more elite universities generally aren't doing what you would consider to be pure merit-based scholarships in significant ways. They might have some programs that require additional applications or research or outreach to become eligible, whereas other institutions are apportioning aid both on a merit-based and a need-based. Whereas again, the elites are probably much more need-based driven, where the offer of admission, the ability to be admitted, is really the success. Is really the advantage in a lot of ways. But it's important to have, I think, a distribution, right, for every student based upon where a student might fall in their own academic successes and personal successes, but also lining that up with a spectrum of different types of institutions that award aid differently. This is, again, I come back to where we started. One of the areas I think that always does raise some anxiety. And so that's where I kind of want to back that up with, there's a good fit for everybody. That fit, that social fit, that personal fit, the reflection, Jack, to your point, where it is, do I see myself succeeding, really shouldn't be driven by any one thing. And whether it's a brand or a name or an athletic program or a major, it really has to be, much like we do the review, a holistic thing. It has to be something where all those pieces come together in a good balance. And reflect what that student needs and what that family feels like is important for them. On average, and an average, as I always worry about, but private schools on average, if you look at their tuition alone, we award about half of what our tuition is, or a little bit more of what half of our tuition is, generally speaking, right? That's just a national report that's out there. But when the average is the middle, that there are also folks at both ends, some families who get some very aggressive awards, and some families who are investing disproportionately more of their income. And that's why, again, I think it's important to think about all those different moving parts and to have a spectrum of schools. I never say rule a school out because of the perception of what their build costs are. Again, going back to the fact that families, nearly always, families receive some level of assistance in some way, outside of sort of the more extreme ends of whether it be selectivity or financial resources. There's ruling the school out because maybe they perceive to be too low priced versus ruling the school out because maybe they perceive to be a little too high priced. I don't know that either one is a good approach. I think it's good to have, again, a distribution of schools across the spectrum relative to students' academic successes and again, the things that they've been able to accomplish in high school. And that does take research, right? And that's where, again, we have the luxury of that time to do that now. Think about, what's a good package here. That College Navigator website that I mentioned, so it's collegenavigator.ed.gov. It's from the government's Department of Education. You can Google it. They do offer a little bit more insight into, what some of the average pricing, average gift aid, how many students receive gift aid. But it gets a little bit in the details, and it gets a little bit further down the road where you're thinking about what that might be like. And I think that's more of a question, I think, for later on, where it's how does maybe my awarding measure up? Where might a student fall in terms of what this college might make available?
Fantastic. So Joe, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's kind of the end of the questions that we had talked about beforehand and some of the larger topics that we want to cover. If there are any parents or students right now that want to ask a direct question, you can either do that by unmuting yourself. If you want to put a question into the chat box, that would be fine too. We have time for a little bit of Q&A before we break at 9 o'clock. So if you have any questions, by all means.
So much like an in-person event, it's hard to get the first question. Some things don't, which is fine. I hope I haven't terrified everybody.
I don't know, we got a lot of black boxes with names. Maybe people just left us on loop in the background as they're eating their Cheerios.
That's all right.
Good morning, it's Kim Cardigan. How are you?
Good morning, how are you?
Good. My question is more around, the process and when we should start, if he's early action and how all that works with Stonehill, I guess.
Sure. That's the application type question is a really great one, right? In every school, and now is a great time to kind of peek in and see what options they offer. The early decision versus early action versus regular decision. I know early decision, right? That binding commitment oftentimes gets a lot of visibility. It's a great choice. If a student is 100% sure that if admitted, that's the only school they would ever attend, and that's a decision and commitment they can make, maybe regardless of what level aid they might get from that school or some others. And again, I think it can be a great option. The student who's ready to 100% go to a certain school for the number of reasons we're sure they considered. I'd say that early action has been a kind of an acceleration there. More and more students choosing those early November, oftentimes early November deadlines. Early action can be a great choice. We offer a November 1st deadline for early action. That's pretty typical. EA is a great option for the student who has been a real steady runner. They've taken strong courses pretty much throughout high school, or maybe they started in a little bit of a less challenging curriculum, but built up through their junior year and did excellent work in their junior year, and feel like that end of this year is a solid indication of their readiness for college. And you can make that commitment. Usually we release early action. I think it's pretty typical right around the holiday season, kind of that late December, early January. And that would typically come both with an offer of admission and if a student's eligible for any of our merit scholarships, which we've got a minimum commitment, at least at the diocesan schools, including CM. So you get kind of that early notice in December, but you still don't have to commit which school you're going to attend to. There's no binding commitment until May 1st. May 1st would be the binding. Regular decision, it can be a great option for students. Sometimes they think that regular decision gets a little bit of an unnecessary negative reputation. The advantage of regular decision is for the student who maybe is doing their best work in junior and senior year, and is going to take some of their stronger courses and starting in the first semester of senior year. If they feel like they've grown quite a bit, and that first semester, we'll get to see those first semester grades before we release decisions for regular decision, which is typically again early March at that point. that can boost a candidate's, especially if they're on that upward trend, can boost a candidate's competitiveness. So regular decision, I think, is not always a bad option. You don't get your decision until a little bit later, but you still have March and April to go back and visit again and ask questions and to go through the aid process. So there's different schools will offer different guidance on which application type might be best for you. And that's a great conversation to have with your admission counselor. That's a great reason to reach out, whether it's now or further down the road, and say, here's a little bit about me. We're not going to take notes on what you're telling us. So we're not going to hold you accountable for anything you might share. But I think it's good to get the guidance of, early action is a great option, and you're going to get a competitive award there, or a competitive decision there, or maybe wait until regular decision. That might be a great option for you.
Thank you.
Joe, we had a question in the chat as well in terms of initial interviews and connecting with students. Are you doing any Zoom sessions with juniors right now? Kind of that initial meeting? How are you meeting with students right now?
So in terms of personal meetings with current juniors, what we call like an interview or something like that, we have not started that process just yet. We are going to go with group sessions beginning next week after next for juniors, which we encourage everyone to register for. If they're interested in kind of getting that first general introduction to campus, who to meet, how to ask questions, what are some of the things that differentiate us. We will likely start doing some interviews over the summer. That's actually pretty typical. It's not a question of what we enjoy doing or anything like that. I think right now we are still working with some of our seniors, with our admitted student families, especially now. And so a lot of our more individual consultations or meetings or outreach are with students who are working really in the final stages of the decision-making process. And so one, not wanting to have the juniors feel like they're under any immense pressure right now, knowing we might have some more optimal options over the summer, and also to be sure that we're making sure that families can make informed decisions about attending. So not quite there yet, but there are some schools that are. There are some schools that are a little bit further down the line. Interviews are it might be one of the first things to come back as personal options, but it really depends on what a school's scale might be, how big of a draw for events they might be able to get, and how they structure that. So remains to be seen a little bit. And I would say that the interview, I think sometimes the word of it implies a greater deal of formality than it really needs. And sometimes I think that carries more anxiety than it really needs. And with that one, Jack, I'd go back to your suggestion of, if you want to make that personal contact, if you want to be an advocate, stand out, differentiate yourself, ask for a conversation. Reach out and say, hey, I'm a junior at CM, and I'm really interested in your school, and here's some of my questions. Do you have 5 minutes to talk to me by phone? Or I've included a list of my questions. When you have a chance to get back to me, that'd be great. And sometimes that's just as much, if not more, impactful for the student who has the impulse and the leadership to do something like that. It's not something we see quite as frequently as maybe we could want to even.
I think that's a fantastic answer, especially when you consider, when I think about in your position and in your shoes, the tremendous amount of resources and everything that you're trying to put together to advise students right now. And really, admissions counselors love working with students, and they love building that relationship. And I think this is a very hard time for all of us, because we don't have that one-on-one connection that we normally have. And even if let's say you take 5 minutes and you go to a school's website and you're popping around and you take a virtual tour and you read about a couple of clubs and organizations, but maybe you still have questions after that, to say, okay, you know what, I looked at A, B, and C. What are the other things I should be looking at, especially if I'm considering this major or this program, or I'm really interested in study abroad? That's a great entrance point for building that relationship and going from there. There was another great question in the chat. So many of our students who are actively engaged with extracurricular activities or athletics, I think we're going to have other conversations down the line about athletic recruiting. So maybe we don't need to go too much into that, but for extracurriculars, for service work, for people who are active outside of the school day, who are now forced to not be active outside of those times, how can they really stand out, or how can they distinguish themselves or articulate their experience?
That's a really great question. It's something that we're talking about for our own students who are involved in, whether it be in athletics or student government or what have you. Where we have some great former CM students who are leaders in our student government as well. I think it becomes an opportunity to tell a story. I think that, especially with this disruption, every student, every family is going to be having a different experience with it. And maybe not the best essay topic. I mean, it could be, it absolutely could be for the student who, felt as though, whether it be an athletic pursuit or something else, that if it's a story that offers some insight into who they are, into their character, because of how they navigated it, how they transitioned through something that was unexpected, and develop maybe some leadership or some self-reflection or some growth and learning through that, finding ways to be involved in a moment that really might limit some of the ways they prefer to be involved. I think that's something that's going to resonate with all of us in different ways. I look to thinking about student leadership. Our student government with their own, they moved to an online format, right? So we can't be there. We can't hold our full campus community forum. They're using a platform called Collaborate instead of Zoom, but they're as active or more active now in a lot of ways than they were. And so, but I know that there are some students who are involved in service organizations and service to the community that right now it's just not something that they can do. And I think, from a resume and activities standpoint, from a holistic review standpoint, I think we all have, as schools, a real appreciation for these are things students cannot control. Again, it's more of an opportunity for them to tell a story. And, when that moment presents itself, finding ways to re-engage as earnestly or maybe differently because of something that for them changed is a way to kind of reorient themselves and differentiate themselves from a growth standpoint. I think there's more opportunity in it than I think there is missed opportunity. The athletic piece is a little bit more of a challenge, and I'm glad you've got some planned conversations around the recruiting process. I work really closely with all of our coaches and our athletic director, but it's something I think we're going to have to adapt to. Things will be a little different in that arena for a little while, but just like with the admission process, that recruiting process, there's no reason why students in a lot of sports should remain in contact with their coaches and with their recruiters. I mean, we're going to have a season in the fall, and in the spring, and so we're still actively in the process of working with prospects. I can guarantee you we're still actively in the process of working with prospects.
And I think if there's any takeaway from the situation that we're in right now is there are many reasons beyond our control for any person to be passive right now, and whether that is fear-based or it's just uncertainty. And I think if you're a student who's looking to really define himself at this moment, it's saying, okay, there are certain things that I can do and certain things I can't do, but I'm at least going to make an effort. I'm going to make an effort to organize the group that I'm involved with. I'm going to make an effort to reach out to the other people who participate in my sport. I'm going to make an effort for us. If we're training separately, but we're all going for a 3-mile run at the same time, then at least, that level of organization is something that you could speak to about your experience when we get to the other side of this, rather than, I think the normal human reaction is I'm going to wait until somebody tells me what to do next. And even if you're taking the wrong action and it's an attempt at organization right now to pull people together rather than just passively waiting for something else to happen, there is not a roadmap for this. So whatever action you take is going to be a new action that is going to be defining the moment rather than letting the moment define you. So I love that that's the way the colleges are thinking about it too. Like whatever you're doing right now, you're making a great effort to do something.
You said that a lot better than that's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. It's the message I want to deliver to my guys too. So
Awesome. I think we might have time for one more question. If there's anything else you want to put in the chat or raise a hand.
Hi, it's Jody McNeil. Hi. Quick question. It goes back to something that was spoken about a few minutes ago about the early action versus regular decision. Can you just touch on how that merit or aid pool is balanced between the early? So, I'm thinking, if I did regular decision or my son did, is the aid given to more of the early? Is there a balance on how that aid is distributed distributed amongst the early actors and the regular decision?
Great question.
And that is a really great question, and that's an area that's evolved over time. I would say every school may have a little bit of a different answer on that one. There may be some nuances with certain programs in terms of eligibility for differentiated awards. Sometimes you see things like that around, whether it be nursing or engineering, or some specialty programs might offer some encouragement or incentivizing in certain directions. Not a ton of that, but I'm not going to say it's not out there. Generally, because we are all awarding some level of federal aid, we have a federal accounting and audit rules that we've behind the scenes baseball here, but we have standards that we have to uphold in the distribution of resources. And so I would say certainly for us, and probably more often the case than not, far more often the case than not, is the standard is really similar students should be awarded similarly. And so our goal is really equity, so that based upon the academic performance of the student, the institutional goals, the resources, the evaluation of the candidate pool, is to award students competitively and equally across pools. I don't think a student limits their eligibility or competitiveness by going necessarily with especially with awarding with one particular application type or another. The only piece I'll say, in fairness, institutions, particularly the very selective institutions, they may have higher admit rates among earlier options, particularly among early decision, because the student's saying, I'm not going to apply anywhere else. Will that necessarily translate into a differentiated funding? That's not really likely. I won't say it's impossible, but that's a question you really want to ask every school you're considering. Am I equally eligible for aid regardless of the application type that I'm choosing? And they should offer you a transparent answer into that, because our goal is to serve the student and the family. Our goal is to be have integrity in the type of offer that we're making. So it's always a good question to ask based upon what application type you might be choosing. If you were asking me at Stonehill, am I equally eligible for aid regardless of which application type I'm choosing? I would say yes, you absolutely are.
And is that true? Is that true? Thank you. Very good answer. Is that true for the merit type awards too? So not.
It is. Okay. Yeah, it is. And I will say, certainly as a school that does merit awarding, and there are a lot of schools, certainly a lot of schools that do, our merit awarding is academically driven. It's based upon how successful a student is and the relative success of the application pool we have in a given year and the class size we have coming in. We review all of our candidates for admission first and foremost. We go through a single process, and then we also go back and then we do a merit process. So once we have a determination of what our resources are and how competitive our pool is, we take those resources and we evaluate and make awards. We also look at those awards within the context of the school to be sure, just across the board, that we are doing as competitive and as just and equitable a job as we possibly can within the context of that student's successes and the community they're coming from. So it's a very careful process. And so when we get to regular decision and we're doing like another round of release, schools will do this differently. Some schools will roll decisions out over a period of time. We're an institution that drops decisions in bulk at certain points. So early action goes all at once and the regular decision goes all at once. And before we release regular decision, we check our regular decisions against our early actions. And if we need to adjust either, we would adjust either.
Thank you.
I would add as well that as something that we experience a lot when we're working with students and families in the fall of their senior year and getting ready to apply, sometimes students will say, okay, well, I have my essay done, my application done, I'm all ready to go for early action. I'm just going to apply early everywhere. And I think that there could be a lot of nuance student by student in terms of maybe just because you're a good EA candidate at school A, you would be a better RD applicant at school B. And having those conversations where sometimes there's a feeling of, I just want to get it done, so I'm going to push it all out the door, so I'm over and done with it. When sometimes there are real benefits to holding back, as Joe said earlier, and going regular decision, so that first glance at your application really shows the best work that you've done as a senior in the fall semester grades. Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining us today for our coffee and speaking with us this morning. If you have any questions for Joe, definitely you can send some to me and I'll pass on his contact information. He's great with follow-up and working with our families. If you have any other questions that might come up, you can always reach out to your son's counselor. So you can talk to me, Ms. Kaplan, or Mr. Claiborne. We're currently scheduling meetings through Zoom. So we're talking with students and families about the process, and we're going to be available all through the spring. And we're sort of in the process of taking in information and helping craft lists right now. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stop the recording now. I hope you have a great day.